first check, please, if interpretation is working all right. Can you please all check the interpretation channels to see whether that works? And if that is okay, I first of all would like to welcome the interpreters and tell you all that we are very happy to have them. They have been working for us now for several weeks and months. They are volunteers, professional interpreters, and I would like to thank them very, very much. Rossi?
No.
Tu microfono, Rossi?
Perdón.
So we would like to thank them very, very much for helping us. So, also, yes, still for the interpreters and for all speakers, please do speak slowly and clearly, because working from a screen is not easy. And it really helps if you do not speak too rapidly. And also, if you can put on your video when you're speaking so that interpreters can see you, this helps a lot. We have a rather heavy agenda for today, but I do hope we can manage if everyone keeps to its speaking time, which is 10 minutes. And in that case, if we manage to do that, we will have 3 panels. And after each panel, we will have time for discussion with the audience, which is one of the most important elements of this day. I will be moderating this panel together with Kamal Labib. I will start with the introduction of the first panel and then give the floor to Kamal. I myself, I come from Brussels. I'm a researcher working on social justice and very active in this process of the World Social Forum. So welcome to all of you. A first remark concerning the panels is that for the first panel, we will have to miss Riccardo Petrella, who cannot be with us. Olivier De Schutter cannot be with us either, but he has sent us a video, which is very interesting and which we will be able to show you. And I will take the privilege as a moderator to use 5 minutes of Riccardo's time to just very briefly summarize you the concept note of this panel and of our work on social justice. We have been working very closely in this context with the World Social Forum for Health and Social Security of Armando de Negri. So what we are working on, talking about social justice, very briefly 4 points. The first point is that we want universal social protection. And that universal does not mean, I want to stress this, universal does not mean uniformity. It does not mean it is the same for everyone. On the contrary, it is respecting and taking care of the enormous diversity in this world, but also taking care that everyone is covered, because that is what we have seen during this corona crisis, that it is so very important that everyone has healthcare and a couple of other things. Now, the second point is that in order to have this, in order to take note of the enormous diversity, we have to know what the needs are, the social needs of people. And in order to know these needs, we have to work with people, and people have to participate. People have to be directly involved. So some of us, as myself, therefore, we speak of commons, because it is people who have to tell what they need and how they need it, and then articulate with different public services, public authorities to have the basic tools for their social protection. The third point is, and this has always been shown very, very clearly during this crisis, if we talk about social justice, it is not only social protection, it is not only healthcare, because people need so many more things. Just think of clear water. If people are told to wash their hands, they need water and they need soap. If people are told to be confined, they need a decent house. They need a decent roof above their heads. So there are very, very and many connections with other sectors. Also a direct connection to the economic sector, which we see now with the vaccines. I mean, if corporations are taking taking the monopoly on producing and distributing the vaccines, we have problems. So I cannot go into detail of this very important point, but the connection between social justice, between climate justice and environmental justice, economic justice, and in the end, obviously, democracy and peace, these points offer us enormously important. And then finally, the fourth point is development. We see in the world of today that development is very often rejected. I think for the wrong reasons. There is a lot that went wrong with the practice of development and development cooperation, but development remains necessary, and development needs to be redefined because it is what social justice is also about. It is about emancipation. It is about the rights of people. It is about the possibility of people to take into their own hands their own destiny. So it is a collective project, it is a societal project, and it is an individual concern. So that for these 4 points, that is the reason we put this title, that social justice is the principle and the objective of social transformation. For us, social justice is a tool to work at the changes that we want. So these are the main points that I do hope all the different presentations of today will contribute to. And I'm very happy to give the floor to our speaker, which is Armando de Negri from Brazil, who is a UN expert and indeed the initiator of the World Social Forum on Health and Social Security. Armando, you have the floor. 10 minutes, please.
Gracias, Francine. ¿Me escuchan bien?
Thank you, Francine. Can you all hear me?
Tarde, voy a
I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I'm going to do my presentation in Spanish. I'm Armando de Negri from Brazil. I'm in Porto Alegre at the moment, in the city of Porto Alegre. I'm going to speak about this construction that we've made in the World Social Forum in the subject of health and social security. Thank you, Francine, for the effort that you've made to integrate these different ideas around social justice, different themes, the effort that we have been doing from the International Council framework to build convergences, and also the definition that has been adopted from the virtual spaces in this forum. So I understand the effort you've made. This has been an effort to dialogue, to have mutual understanding, to listen to each other, to understand how we can have a totality in this complexity, and how to transform the world, and the intentions and the aims of social justice, together with environmental justice, and in a way of reinserting social life within the economy, and also the collective wealth that we share. So from the topic of health, currently, since 3 or 4 years, we have been starting to look at social protection ideas, how we can widen this with democracy, peace, and development from new political policies and social justice policies. With this range and this ambition, which is so wide,
explorar las distintas
très large. Nous essayons d'explorer les différentes manières de représenter ce concept dans la lutte politique et nous essayons de voir comment nous pouvons donner lieu à une réappropriation de beaucoup de dimensions qui ont été dominées par l'idéologie néolibérale. Donc,
some conversations about democracy, about freedom, social justice, and also environmental justice, which were all reduced or co-opted or displaced by a hegemonic discourse.
Una tarea de fondo que
So
es
we
construir una contra
we must which resume aspirations of many countries about their sovereignty, about their emancipation, about their resources within a framework of international cooperation, which imposes some countries' policies over others. So we are trying to fight structural inequalities, aspirations to a new economical international structure. And this is all expressed within a developmental framework, which is collective and is a value, a key concept, this collective concept, together along with rights. And this includes understanding social security in a wider sense, in a social production, which includes civil society, security, and democracy. Economical security is also social and environmental security. We need to put this within the framework as well, within economical rights and environmental rights. So talking about developmental framework, we have a political agenda when we are looking at elaborating, and we want to link this with developmental rights in our agenda, and the debate about what type of development are we talking about. I'm not talking about neoliberal development
del desarrollo neodesarrollista, como hemos vivenciado en América Latina en los
or in
últimos
America
tiempos,
Latina,
sino que hablamos de una nueva
developmental policies. We are looking at other types of developmental policies which include aspirations for social justice as a general framework, which has a strong dimension to establish a new world, a new possible world, that we can construct the possibility of how to get there. So it's something important which we need to relocate ourselves among social matters beyond the limit of the state, which implies compensation in front and a commitment of social movements who are to redistribute wealth, and this, we are reaching the limits of this system. If we want to develop, then we must
llegar a un debate sobre estos límites en el marco de un concepto de necesidades
about the radical necessities
que no vamos
of social justice. We will not achieve it within this capitalist systems. Therefore, beyond these limits of the capitalist neoliberal systems,
atavismo de concentración de la
in
riqueza.
their desperate need to
O sea, que realmente
corner wealth and put it in to hoard wealth. We must transform this.
Realmente, en este foro,
So provisionally in this forum, we have a space of social justice, environmental justice, for women, other themes. So throughout 2020, we have been trying to build
estratégicas
a constant convergences and strategies which will allow us to welcome these radical ideas into a debate such as we're having today within this capitalist framework. But we must go beyond these limits and the historical horizon of what we can achieve. So this is what the debate is about today, because we are very much involved in these social civil movements, popular movements, from an ideological liberal framework.
Frecuentemente aceptamos la idea.
We must accept the idea that we have to focalize social justice for those groups who are most vulnerable, and accept that the semantics of liberalism and neoliberalism, and not think of subjects as the right or full right, but they have reduced our capacity. And we must provide for their needs. They are getting state help. Sorry, someone's mic is open. Rosie, your mic's on. Francine, your mic's on as well. So this generates
una forma de relación entre sociedad y Estado.
A way of relating between society and state is what we currently see within the pandemic. So the state proposes emergency humanitarian help, and this isn't based on rights. It just gives exceptional aid packages linked to facing the pandemic. So what we must do is to revise, have a much deeper revision of how we can incorporate within civil society this dominating concept of dissolving solidarity, and therefore having a kind of recognition of common sense that we are related to the state, but we mustn't depend on it. So the state should be a space for a project to exercise wealth
de las inequidades que se va instalando. De ahí que el enfrentamiento a la crisis sanitaria debería
the crisis of the health situation we have today, healthcare,
de transformación, ¿no? De la sociedad.
Transformation, how we must transform society, and we need an immediate treatment of the crisis, and an agenda that is starting to will be credible and gain sense for the population facing the crisis. So this is about the crisis. And France, I just wanted to talk a bit about, if you will allow me, Francine, about the formulation of a very powerful policy, which is called In the Name of Humanity.
Él habla de tres audacias, ¿no?
And this speaks about three audacias. Audacia, which is to make poverty illegal this is a very interesting political point, because poverty as a central category has problems within it, because poverty is then considered part of a natural environment and not a political one. Illegalizing poverty means that we would have to take down the legal and political apparatus of the state that produces and reproduces poverty and makes it natural. Therefore, this would be a way of mitigating it, of mitigating extreme poverty, but not recognizing impoverished, or those who are vulnerable, or those who are maintained structurally by both economically and socially. So secondly, what would be useful would be a total disarmament. So a proposal to completely pull apart making weapons. And this is an immediate, this would be in every state for all security policies. So within each society, within their societies, they could diminish their militarization. But I would need more time to speak about that. But the last audacia would be the idea of definancializing the economy. And this has to do with a credit system, with the debt system, with the banking system, all the transactions within social life. If we definancialize the economy, it would be a clear way of helping. So these are three ways that can accompany self-reflection and the intensification of democracy. This was raised in 1992, that the great challenge is between economy, the absolute economic thought, and democracy itself. He said that the only way of controlling the capitalist voracity was through democracy and through true population participation within the rules of in the life of their economic lives. So between the neoliberal economy and the democracy and the inequality and the environment, I think that this synthesis of challenges of social justice and economic justice and the radicalization of democracy should line our aspirations for our society to make us able to contest the homogeny of our political systems. I hope that what we're going to do throughout 2021 will allow us to strengthen and deepen the work that we're doing. And so I'm here. We are just starting to open our mouths to have a sustainable and a way that we can organize ourselves politically if we want to create these alliances which are capable of molding our future world, and this space of social justice as the way of hosting debates for social protection systems that we are presenting here. I hope this has been useful for the debate. Thank you very much.
In a way, it is good that there is one speaker missing, so you had a bit more time. You had a couple of more minutes. While I'm looking for the video of Olivier De Schutter, I would like to tell you that, unfortunately, as I already mentioned, Riccardo Petrella is not with us. But Riccardo Petrella has two important achievements at this moment, and that is one, that he developed a program for declaring poverty illegal. Very simple. Poverty in our world should simply not exist. It should be illegal. And the second point is that he is currently working on a project for making the vaccines a common good, which is also a very important point for obviously for social justice. Now, Olivier De Schutter is currently the UN Special Rapporteur for extreme poverty, and has been in the past, not so long ago, the Special Rapporteur for food. So he will also talk to us about the problem of poverty and what we can do about it. I hope this will work. ¿Cómo hacer?
Tienes que salir de compartir video y volver a compartir y elegir la opción de compartir con audio de la computadora.
I am screen sharing. New share.
Is your screen share, Francine?
Sí.
Ok, es que aparece en tu página, otra página. Tienes que elegir la página donde está la presentación que vas a ver. Tienes que decir stop screen share. Primero dile stop para que pueda salir con audio. Primero decir stop, dejar de compartir primero.
Stop sharing.
Exacto. Y ahora, vuelve a compartir. Tienes que tener abierto el archivo ya que vas a compartir. Abre primero el archivo que vas a compartir.
Eso lo hizo.
Ok, ya que está abierto, ahora dile compartir pantalla.
Just looking at some technical things at the moment, so there's nothing to translate really. They're just trying to get this video up of De Schutter.
Mira,
Normal service will be resumed as soon as possible.
Cuando tú dices screen share, ¿ves ahí mi pantalla que quiero compartir? ¿No?
No.
Hay una que dice, debe decir optimizar el video con audio. Hay una opción abajo de tu pantalla. Pero tienes que hacer esa selección antes de compartir. Ok. Marta, vamos a ver, te hago intérprete, Marta. María, ya estás como intérprete, María.
¿Escuchan?
No.
Francine, abra el video y después comparta.
Primero tienes que abrir el video, Francine, y después decir compartir pantalla.
Réduisent les inégalités et protègent les gens de l'extrême pauvreté. Et donc, la croissance économique est présentée comme la condition de possibilité de la réduction de la pauvreté. Cette manière de réfléchir me paraît compréhensible, mais elle vient du XXe siècle et elle me paraît dépassée. Elle me paraît, à vrai dire, témoigner d'un imaginaire.
Francine, tienes que tener primero abierto el video en tu computadora, no desde la pantalla de compartir archivo. Gracias, Ashik. Thank you so much, everyone.
Ok, muy bien, Francis. Así está, ahora simplemente volver al inicio del video.
Du marché du travail, une série de mesures qui prétendent être justifiées par la nécessité de faire croître l'économie, augmenter la richesse produite.
¿Lo pones le das inicio al video, Francine?
No, porque cerraste, era solo volver abajo al inicio.
Sí, screen share, ok. Share sound, ok. Y entonces...
Ya estaba pasando para nosotros, Francina, era solo empezar al inicio del video, o sea, retroceder el cursor de abajo. Entras, compartir pantalla con ya el archivo abierto y empieza otra vez. ¿Ya lo hiciste?
¿Ahora sí?
No. Tienes que compartir.
¿Ahora?
Todavía no, ya estaba, pero saliste. A ver, ya está entrando ahora. Ok, ahora se ve el video. Simplemente ponga al inicio del video, con el cursor del audio de abajo, vuelva al inicio.
Augmenter les richesses pour ensuite prendre des mesures qu'on pourrait appeler compensatoires par des politiques sociales redistributives qui réduisent les inégalités et protègent les gens de l'extrême pauvreté. Et donc, la croissance économique est présentée comme la condition de possibilité de la réduction de la pauvreté. Cette manière de réfléchir me paraît compréhensible, mais elle vient du XXe siècle et elle me paraît dépassée.
This way of thinking comes from the 20th century. I think, to me, it is out. If we stick to this way of thinking about poverty reduction, we're confronted to a situation in which, in the name of economic growth, we will take a series of measures, of decisions, for example, in terms of trade liberalization, or in terms of creating an attractive environment for the investors, or in terms of deregulation of the labor market. So measures that are justified by the need of, for the need of economic growth, but we actually create a reversible situation that will, in a paradox, increase poverty and inequalities. Besides, this way, this conventional way of seeing poverty reduction shows that we can't build economic growth that won't be harmful, extremely harmful to the environment, increasing our pressure on the environment, including, for example, the emission of greenhouse gases, or, for example, the pressure on natural resources without leaving enough time for them to renew. So this model of fighting poverty has to be replaced by a model that I would call a model of inclusive economy. This model aims at changing the economy so that it stops creating inequalities and poverty, and that we're not just repairing the inequalities after they were created. What is it about? For example, in this inclusive economy, it is about guaranteeing to every man and every woman access to work without discrimination based on social background, or based on income, or based on socioeconomic discrimination, so that the economy can be way more inclusive, and while recognizing that everyone can contribute with their talents, abilities to the labor market, and therefore creating opportunities in the name of a right to work, which is correctly applied. Or, for example, it is about encouraging a social economy based on solidarity, a cooperative model, democracy within the companies, a model in which workers would be fully active in the identification of the strategies of the companies. So this model has to be our first choice and has to progressively replace the conventional economy. So we need to be more creative in the way the economy works, so that it stops creating poverty inequalities that then we try to compensate by social policies. Because this classical way of proceeding is today, and I repeat, outdated, and it's not taking into account the need to eradicate poverty in the respect of environmental limits. So this is my objective as the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. This objective, which is to develop alternatives for the alternative to the conventional economy, so that the market can be integrating, inclusive, and stops being a source of discrimination and exclusion. Thank you very much, and I wish you an excellent work.
So, in fact, this is also the same question of whether you say poverty is illegal or that you should prevent it. It comes down to the same point. It has indeed no reason of existence in our very, very rich world. So I will open the floor for questions. Rassi, there is one person who apparently has no access. Could you look to that? Rassi, perdón. Dalia Hamayel no tiene acceso. ¿Podrías ayudar a darle acceso para Elisa?
Could you help this person to get in as a panel?
So if there are questions, please, if you can put them in the chat box. Questions that Armando could answer, because he is of course very well aware of the whole problematic, and can also answer questions concerning Olivier De Schutter's presentation. Any questions? Any remarks?
Francine, perdón. Francine, ¿cómo se llama la persona que tiene que entrar? ¿Ya entró? ¿Es Tania?
Dalia Hamayel. Dalia Hamayel. She's on the list of speakers.
Creo que ya entró. Sí, te escucho.
Félix, una pregunta. Félix, ¿tienes una pregunta? ¿No me escuchas?
Sí.
Por favor, si quieres la palabra.
Would you like to speak, Felix? Yes, a question about this approach of inclusive economy. Those of us who are driving the solidarity economy, it's not a species within the economy. It is part of the process. This inclusive economy would give us not so much a type of economy, but an emancipating process. It includes economic, social, cultural elements. Would he identify with that question? Thank you.
And another question from Baba I. Baba? Baba I. Armando, could you answer this first question?
Sí. No, muy interesante.
Yes, very interested. I think this subject that I briefly referred to it as of inserting the economy and social life. There's a lot of special economies are part, obviously. I think what draws our attention, it's not something alternative. It's a transforming power project.
en esta aspiración de justicia
it should be
social.
part of this general aspiration for social justice. I think the movements that are powerful in this field of solidarity economy need to deal with a series of issues. As Petrella would say, there'll always be a financial aspect to this, but it's subject to the productive element. But we've got unproductive financial capital is what dominates now. So something that Olivier said was very important. How can the workers participate in the whole process of production so they can enjoy the benefits of what is produced and the work done? There are historical expenses. Carpolani attached a lot of value to the self-management experiences. I think that was the Yugoslavian model of workers' self-management in Argentina too. This could lead to a scale where we can go towards another economic order and on an international level. It's a long journey, but it's a logic of accumulation as opposed to one of redistribution. I think we're halfway between the two. We've discussed the productive model and the way wealth is produced, and at the same time, use social protection systems with their redistributive abilities. A taxation system, the role of the state, public contracting, distributing wealth through universal public services. What Francine said about public assets, in the sense of energy, water, sanitation, housing, transport, they should come out of this whole dynamic of accumulation and enter in a welfare logic. So they shouldn't be in private hands. They should be, I think these are things that look to the future. From the past, we have got a lot to reflect about, but we're on the edge of a new historical phase. Some people talk of a new social contract, but that's the organization economy is at the heart of this debate, obviously. The environmental protection, we need a radical change in the way the economy functions. I think we need to face up to the traps and the challenges of the economy as it's set up at the moment. With this entrepreneurial initiative seems to prevail now. There's an intended confusion is created here. There seems to be a great focus on this individual entrepreneurship rather than on a more collective social basis. There's great potential. It's intrinsically linked to social policy. Thanks, Armando.
There are two other questions.
Hay dos preguntas más.
Capitalist system to declare poverty illegal. There are two kinds of answer. Of course, you can declare it, obviously. That's very easy. That's a discourse level. Whether you can make it illegal is another question. But what we are working at with social justice is precisely to prevent poverty. What you can do with social protection is not fighting poverty, but preventing poverty. Have policies that make it impossible for people to become poor, because we should not speak about poor people. We should speak about impoverished people. That is the whole problem. And if you have systems let us say, for healthcare, for pensions, for housing, and for income security, then you can prevent poverty. And that is the main point. And through this prevention of poverty, you can also change the system. And the second question of Claudio, which is very interesting, I will read it. How many webinars has each of us attended since the lockdowns in a way dealing with the same core issues? Is there any progress to show in the last year? Should webinars not be education for action? That is, of course, a very interesting and a very good question. All I can say in this respect, especially referring to the World Social Forum, is that we should be very, very aware that we are now in a virtual reality. I think it is very difficult to ask to make real progress in this difficult period. But this crisis has one silver lining, and that is that it shows what we need, that it shows what the needs of people are and how you can help people. That is a very, I think, a very important element in this crisis. And the second point, as I said, this is a virtual reality. We are now, this whole week of the virtual World Social Forum, which is so, in effect, it is so good. But at the same time, we do not meet each other. We cannot talk to each other. We cannot really share experiences. We are in a virtual reality and we should not forget it. And what we should do, I think, is prepare for the after. Prepare for when this crisis will be finished. And then indeed, try to coordinate, try to organize. And that is what I hope will happen after this virtual forum, that towards the forum of next year, which we hope will be in Mexico, that we can indeed work together at coordinating actions, and that this forum can help to motivate people for action. And I think if we can do that, it is indeed a very, very useful exercise.
Puedo, Francine, añadir algo ahí, porque sí, yo creo que nosotros...
I'd like to add something there. I've got an overdose of webinars at the moment. What's the political intention of this communication? Whether it's virtual or in presence. How can we use strategic intelligence to help us? I think it's a good idea to continue with our webinars. We can, reflect the way we're thinking and using the virtual environment as a tool. It'll be great when we do get together. Yes, obviously. But I think we need to rethink the intention of the debates.
Construcción como viabilidad, y con eso no descarto ninguna idea de antemano, sino que las desafío a construir la posibilidad de...
The challenges will be able to give us the chance to help this transformation of society. One of the problems is that we live in society that, in this conservative economy modality. How do we break that system actively, effectively, so that our energy can not only be well directed, but also extended? The illegality of poverty. Well, Petrella and his group, it's not just a declaration, no. That could be dangerous. In a sense, you could end up illegalizing poor people, so that's vis-a-vis the states. repressing them.
We go to the second panel, and if Bruno comes back, then he gets the floor after these speakers. We have 3 eminent speakers in the second panel. We will start with Isabel Ortiz, who works as director for the Global Social Justice Program and the Initiative for Policy Dialogue, who was formerly at the ILO. Then we have Mr. Ayuba Wabba, who is president of the International Trade Union Confederation, and who comes from Nigeria, if I am correct. And Anita Gurumurthy, who is our expert on IT, on digitalization. So I would like to give the floor to Isabel first. Isabel? Hope you're there. Cannot be seen on the screen. Isabel Ortiz. Isabel? Bruno is there, but where has Isabel gone?
Ahí está, Isabel está ahí.
Make Isabel a panelist. Rosie, apparently Isabel Ortiz is not a panelist.
A gente consegue fazer a gestão disso.
So while we are waiting, I will give the floor to Mr. Ayuba Wabba, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much, moderator, and I really appreciate. And let me go straight to the point in discussing the issue of social justice and democracy. And I will start from the point of a truth that was established 102 years ago when the International Labour Organization, ILO, was established in 1919. And that truth is that war are not just brought to an end by the silencing of the gun, but by the echoes of social justice. This truth was later to be institutionalized in the very first word of the International Labour Organization Constitution. And I quote, "Whereas universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based on social justice." And certainly the corporate financial institution sees social justice as the political and physiological theory that focuses on the concept of fairness in relations between individuals in society and equal access to wealth, opportunity, and social privileges. So social justice can be viewed as a distributive justice that promotes the interests of social groups existing either as oppressed or thriving as oppressors. It is this same fact that then lead us to the issue of democracy. And it was the man Americans fondly call as Abraham Lincoln, who defines democracy as government of the people, by the people, and it is expected that democracy, the assumption is that majority are usually motivated by a common good in making political decisions. But certainly this is not the situation today in this unequal world. Democracy, no doubt, is not delivering on social. We live in an unequal world. In the last decade, inequality gap have continued to widen. As we speak, before the advent of COVID-19, only half of the world population has access to any form of social protection. And only a third of the world's population had access to comprehensive social protection in line with ILO standards. In fact, the situation in Africa is worse because as we speak, more than 82% of the population in Africa are not covered by any form of social benefit. And this is because of the fact that more than 70% are working in the informal sector. And therefore, this is a serious challenge. And I think those are the challenges that democracy need to confront if we're social justice anywhere in the world. I think the COVID-19 have further exposed the challenges that is affecting the world globally. As we speak, many cannot access quality public service, be it healthcare, be it water, be it energy, be it education. In fact, in many jurisdictions, it has been profit above the people. It ought not to be so. It ought to be people above profit. In fact, it ought to be people-centered approach to development. But this is not really the situation. And therefore, this is why this forum is not only very important, but I think this forum is important so that we don't create wealth for few and then poverty for many. And I think this is what this conversation is all about. Democracy should be able to create wealth for the majority of our people, not creating wealth for few and then poverty for many. So poverty can be ended because it's man-made. If poverty is man-made, it can be addressed through social justice. And that's why I want to remind us of the parameters of social justice, which democracy ought to deliver in every country. One is access to resources, life-supporting resources such as food, healthcare, shelter, education, livelihood, and recreational activities. Those are one of the ingredients that democracy ought to make available and is part of social justice. The emergence of COVID-19 has put more burden on the access by billions of people on life-supporting resources, further impeding the coverage of social protection nets and the penetration of social justice. This reality is rift in developing economies, where worse social indices cannot even be imaginable. The second leg is equality. We live in a world where equitable access to social resources is drifting dangerously apart. The gap between schools, health, and recreational facilities used by the rich and those of the poor is embarrassingly wide. I urge this forum to emphasize the gap in the quality of education, healthcare, nutrition, shelter, and recreational activities in our societies so that it can be narrowed and it can be for everybody, not for the rich and the children of the poor. And that can be done
through ensuring that we strengthen our public health system. I think that is one issue that the COVID-19 have exposed, because in many countries, they are now thinking of rethinking their social structure, where public service can be strengthened to provide those quality services and everybody can be able to access. The other issue is the issue of participation. There is an inalienable quest for every human being to be heard and to be given an opportunity to be part of decision-making process. This is currently not the situation. Even in the midst of COVID-19, many people are being aliened from their voice being heard. And that's why people had to resort to the issue of violence and social unrest. In many countries, you know, as of today, from Tunisia to Algeria to Egypt, including my country, Nigeria, there have been social unrest led by the youth because there is no employment opportunities for them. And in most cases, they don't have means of livelihood. In fact, the institution have followed. And if the institution have followed, it then means we need to rethink the issue of a new model. The issue of diversity is one issue I think that we need to also address. You have a situation where you have workers that are working not on permanent basis. You have the issue of gender. Women are suffering because they are more in the informal sector, particularly in the informal sector where they don't have any social security cover. So we need to address all of these issues if we are to have a society that is just to all of us. And lastly is the issue of human rights. Cracks of social injustice are created when the fundamental human, trade union, economic and civil culture and civil rights are actually undermined and are actually under attack. In fact, with impunity, in many countries, people's rights, trade union rights are being attacked with impunity. It ought not to be so under a structure of democracy and social justice. We need to take position of social injustice. These pathogens include neoliberal colonialism, economic imperialism, which I think the other speaker from Brazil mentioned, neoliberalism, and extreme capitalism without conscience and without consequence. Those are issues that I think are perverse in today's world. And I think the surest way to try to bring about social justice in today's unequal world is the issue of universal social protection. In fact, as I speak to you, the International Trade Union Confederation is leading a campaign, and we are looking for global leaders and democracy that has champions to be able to speak to address this issue. We need to institutionalize a global fund for universal social protection to enable the poorest nations to respond to global disruption, such as the one of COVID-19, and resilience for future health and economic shock. From pre-crisis estimate, a global fund for universal social protection will need about $37.8 billion United States dollars for the first 5 years to close the financial gap to address the issue of social protection. And I think I want to propose to this forum the timeless pillars of social justice as the shining beacon for a new social contract and a new social justice system. And one of them is that labor is not a commodity in the light of the fact that the current pandemic will call for universal access to healthcare, listing of COVID-19 as a compensable occupational disease, where sick leaves will be paid to all workers, including casual workers and the self-employed, including platform workers, migrant workers, and workers in the informal sector. That is how to bring about social justice. The second one is the freedom of expression and association and the respect for fundamental rights of citizens, including fundamental trade union rights. We have come to the understanding that poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. And that is why you can see that peace is actually not available in many countries because of the fact that there have been deprivation. And the last one is all human beings, irrespective of their race, creed, sex, have the right to pursue both material well-being and their spiritual development in a condition of freedom and dignity and of economic security and of equal opportunity. This is what social justice is all about. And I think in equal world, it's important that all of us on this forum begin to echo this because of the fact that COVID-19 has exposed the inadequacies in today's model of economic development And I want to emphasize the issue of quality public service, which I think because of the issue of capitalism, in fact, most of those services are now for profit, and I think it doesn't all go well. So on that note, I want to once again thank you for this platform and also for thinking innovatively to have this forum despite the challenge of COVID-19 that is rampaging the entire world, economy, health-wise, and even disruption of production lines across the globe. I think this is the best time to have such a forum so that we can rethink how to reshape the world, and we can also come together using people's power and workers' power to be able to change the narrative and do proper engagement of engaging democracy to be able to work for the people. Thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you very much. We should not try to have Isabel Ortiz added as a panelist if someone can take care of. Oh, okay, there she is. Thank you very much. If you could open your video as well, Isabel, that would be great. And I share the screen here, and then you should be able to show your slides, I think. Is that correct?
Hello?
Yes.
Wonderful, it's working.
We do not see you.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting panel. Let me start saying that I agree with all the former panelists. And given that I have only 10 minutes, I thought that I will focus my presentation on financing a new alternative development strategy. For that, I will have one slide, and I see the share screen has been activated, so thank you for that. And now the critical thing here is that we are all often told that there are no funds. We are told that these are good ideas, that they can be debated, but the reality, there are no funds. And not only that, actually, most governments, they tell us that austerity cuts are needed. The reality is that there are plenty of funds. I had more slides on inequality, which I'm not going to show, but really the amount of money that is in the world, it is really, extraordinary, and it can fund all the development agenda that we want, from, universal social protection, public services, income security, the commons, you name it. There is funds for everything. And I'm going to present 8 options that all countries have, even the poorest countries. So what is happening at the moment is that governments, often advised by the IMF, they're actually going the easy way. They're replicating budgets or cutting them and not trying the more other routes to actually increase the budget. So instead of having a tiny budget that leaves the state without capacity to act, to implement human rights, if we look for these 8 options, we'll have a much larger budget that will allow us to do it. So these are the 8 options. And now let's hope it works. Is it working?
Not yet.
Okay. So share screen. Here it is.
Okay, now it's coming.
Good. Well, very good. So these are the 8 options that any country, no matter the poorest country, will have. The first one will be to increase tax revenue. Now, we know there are many types of taxes on import, exports, on, real estate, property, wealth, you name it. Now, what we need to ensure is that we go for those taxes that are more redistributive. We need to start looking for more seriously to income wealth taxation at personal level, at corporate level, and including the financial sector, that, by the way, remains untaxed in the majority of countries. And we have very good examples from developing countries, not going more far. For instance, let me give you an example, Brazil. Brazil had a financial transaction tax running during 15 years. And with that, it was actually expanding the social protection coverage and benefits to people. and it was dismantled because of pressures from the financial sector itself. But however, it shows it can be done. And we do have other, experiences from other countries. So here what we need to avoid particularly are the regressive taxes, like consumption taxes, like VAT. And this is oddly what countries more generally are looking at the moment. When they have, when they are finding themselves in a situation of austerity situation, they look generally to increase consumption taxes like VAT. This is wrong. Consumption taxes are regressive. It means that a poor person pays the same that a rich person for the same product. Is regressive. So we need to move towards taxation that is progressive, meaning taxing more those that have more wealth. Second option will be fighting illicit financial flows. And as the name says, this is actually, there are illegal activities like money laundering, tax evasion, or trade mispricing. Now, the amount of this is huge, though it is not properly known because we don't really even know the amount of tax evasion that exists in the world. But for calculations done, these illicit financial flows are more than 10 times the whole amount of development aid. So very clearly tackling those which are illegal activities will give the governments a huge amount of funds to, to implement and to do human rights, the commons, public services, and any others. Then for social protection, it's particularly important to increase social security coverage. And we do have with examples in developing countries, for instance, Argentina or Uruguay. And linked to that is the issue of formalizing workers with good contracts and wages that will, put them out of a situation of precariousness and give them an acceptable contract and wage, which is actually extremely important as much as social security. Then a fourth option, will be to restructure and manage debt. We do have with the cases, historically, many countries have restructured their debt. I mean, we're talking about more than 80 in recent years. But we have to think that given the enormous expenditures that governments have entered because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the levels of debt are rising massively in countries, and we are going to see, starting this year, 2020, an increase on austerity cuts because to serve the debt. Now, we should not allow that to happen, particularly cuts that are important for social purposes. So for that, it's very important to restructure debt or to, and in case of very poor countries, try to work towards debt forgiveness and relief. Fifth, we have aid and transfers. Now, many are opposed to development aid and to the conditions, which I fully endorse. But however, the reality is that the wealthiest countries, the richest countries, remain being in high-income economies, and the arguments for redistribution between North and South are vast. This could happen, but without the conditionalities that have been traditionally attached. So this will be a fifth option that we have there. And an example, which I thought that Olivier was going to talk about, will be the Global Fund for Social Protection Floors. Sixth option will be tapping into fiscal and foreign exchange reserves. And we have also with examples. And here people will say, and what is that? Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. In South Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, where the food security needs are large, many central banks are keeping money inside of the central bank. And this is a conservative policy to try to avoid being a weak fiscal situation of the government. So the general rule for countries will be to keep in the central bank about 4 months of imports. But however, at the moment, central banks accumulate much and much more as a precautionary measure. But what is the value of that, to have so much funds at the central bank if people might be dying of starvation outside? This needs to be reevaluated and, put money to work for real human purposes, not to, for a conservative policy to keep funds in the central bank. Then seventh option will be to adopt a more accommodative macroeconomic framework. And we do have a number of countries doing that. The pandemic actually, moved that. Eighth option will be the typical one, actually it's the most common, is relocating public expenditures. Now, if this has to happen, what is very important is that we move them from high cost and low social impact activities like defense to those that are needed socially, which it could be public services, social protection, and the rest. And we have very good examples. For instance, Costa Rica and Thailand, both of them cut the defense budget to actually invest in health. So very good examples that can be used for other countries. Now, I have added a ninth option, but I put it differently because everybody's talking about it now, but it cannot be done by a single country. This will require international coordination and agreement of all countries. This will be to issue new special drawing rights in the IMF. And many people are talking about that. It's an option with the Biden administration. However, I need to point that this has a downside. It will create much more money to be invested in countries. However, it will be more power to the IMF. So an alternative to that will be to create some equivalent fiat money and some UN agency that will handle funds, for instance, UNDP. That will be a similar option that will be more equitative and more working for social justice than not giving it to the IMF. Now, no matter that, I want that any country has some of these 8 options. Not all countries are the same. Some countries will have more, possibilities in one or another area. But at least 5 of these options cannot be applied everywhere. And now this, and what is very important here to point is what speakers were pointing before. These different alternatives are too important to be left to the Ministry of Finance. It is fundamental that this is discussed in an open national dialogue with civil society, with trade unions, with all relevant stakeholders. They cannot be decisions that are taken behind closed doors by some technocrats that, are not correctly assessing the social impacts of the decisions they take. So the national public dialogue on financing issues is fundamental. It's part of good governance and democracy, and it must happen. And simply to say, if anybody is more interested, this comes from a publication that you can download. It is in English, French, and Spanish. So I put the one that was translated into the 3. And that in English will be Fiscal Space for Social Protection and the Sustainable Development Goals. And it was a publication by ILO, UNICEF, and UN Women, meaning 3 UN agencies together defending and trying to work with governments in the field, with civil society and with trade unions to make this public dialogue a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this very, very, very useful overview of what is indeed possible. And I think we should certainly never forget it when ministers tell us that nothing can be done, because yes, many things can be done. And as you said very rightly, this should not be left to the ministers of finance. I think this is one of the very important messages. I hope Anita is there. Anita is the IT and digitalization expert. I will be very happy to give her the floor. Anita?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, good, fine. Please.
Yeah, I just need to do screen share. So will you be able to kindly put on the co-host?
Okay.
Thank you. In the meanwhile, let me thank Francine and the others. It's an honor to be here to dream up an alternative world with all of you all. And long ago, I was part of the World Social Forum in Mumbai, which is a city in India. And the energy was very, very palpable. So it is indeed an honor to be here, although it is a virtual world. Yes, so I can hopefully screen share. I'm going to try. Yes. So what I'm going to talk about is Digital New Deal, as if people and planet matter. And I heard my previous colleagues and extremely inspired by the thinking on social justice and outlawing poverty, if indeed we could live in a world like that. So I'd really like to lay the context quickly about the takeover of people and planet in the digitalized environment. The digital economy, as we know, is characterized by the capture of data value by large transnational corporations. And they're, of course, called the big five, big tech, whatever you wish to call them. But I think what is really of concern is that this is a cross-sectoral phenomenon now. So we don't only have big tech, we have big agri, big pharma, big oil, and much more. And we actually see a collusion, a kind of diabolic coming together of big tech companies with big pharma companies. And what we're going to see in the future is a kind of a database restructuring. So this is not just financialization, finance capital, but also a kind of extraction of, social surplus, if you will, along through the machinations of data. So you can look at manufacturing, 3D printing, robotics, automation, precision farming with IoT devices in big farmlands, remote controlled agriculture, and of course, classrooms without teachers, classrooms without children, and healthcare through telemedicine, and even Alexa giving you advice about, what you should be really doing if you actually had a stroke. So this is the kind of world where there's a corporatization of everything. And what this has actually meant is that data value concentration has led to extreme disparities in wealth. And so we have an MIT Labs modeling study which actually shows that in the past 20 years, with the same in the same period that we actually saw an acceleration of digitalization, we've also seen extreme wealth disparities. And this is not an accident, because the internet paradigm got swallowed up by the neoliberal paradigm. And this has also meant a loss of policy space for countries in the global south, and they are completely unable to protect the rights of small economic actors, the rights of informal labor, the rights of food producers, and of course, at another end, the very, very core areas of civic autonomy and electoral democracy. The tragedy is that the current global governance status quo is not able to deal with this at all, because there's a laissez-faire economy out there of free data flows. This is exactly like the axiom of free trade and how it's going to level the world. We also see a rapid hollowing out of pockets of capital and skill in the local economies. And at ITforChange, from where I come, we did a study of the tourism sector, and we actually see that because of all these tourism platforms online, data and data-based organization of the tourism sector has simply decimated local livelihoods, the life and livelihoods of guides, tour guides, of small businesses, because they simply don't know how they could register and come on Airbnb or some such platform. The erosion of rights of workers is particularly egregious. It's because labor share in the value added in GDP has been consistently going down. And this is very much the style of the digital economy, where hard-won rights of workers, I think we really see a big slippage, because today the definition of who is a worker, who is a platform worker, who is a contractor, all these terminologies seem to distract us from the basic business which defines power in this world, which is the relationship between capital and labor. In a post-COVID world, all of this has really gone completely awry. It has become intensified, and we actually see that technology, digital infrastructures have taken over, and they've become the social and economic infrastructures of our time. And this exclusionary, extractive, and exploitative paradigm is something that we are deeply, deeply concerned about, because digital society is not about a kind of a fringe phenomenon. We are very much within it. It's the technology is constitutive of how social relations are taking shape. And therefore, I think we shouldn't be actually having this kind of a superimposed view of or analysis about technology. I think it is a kind of a paradigmatic way by which we exist, and the human condition, so to speak, is shaped by this. So at IT4Change, we have been thinking about a new digital deal, and we commissioned a series of essays from a lot of people such as yourselves. And we wanted to start imagining how a new digital paradigm that would unleash equality, solidarity, sustainability, climate justice can really become a reality, and how we can re-articulate the meaning of the internet and database technologies, And this would, of course, call for democracy and a reinvention of democracy from the local to global levels. So I'm just going to take you very quickly through the elements of the Digital New Deal as a people and planet matter. And this is a kind of a collective exercise that we embarked on, as I said. So there are three pillars to this. And the first pillar is to reimagine the relationship between technology, society, and nature. The second pillar is about decolonizing the digital paradigm. And the third is about restoring people's control over the digital technologies. So we have some beautiful illustrations, and you will find all of this in a compendium, and I can share the links with all of you here. And what is very, very clear is that we need Southern epistemic traditions, which, foreground the relevance of alternative forms of imagining knowledge and power, and a feminist ethics rooted in socio-ecological well-being as the core of digital social organizing. So we need a society where human beings and their ecological systems can be seen in totality. The second is that we need a post-individualist framework for data claims that recognizes collective needs and rights. And that goes very, very closely with some of what the previous speakers have already asserted. Thirdly, we need data sovereignty of peasant farmers and small economic actors for community control over food and local livelihoods. We do not want all of food production to get integrated into the logistics chains of Amazon or Alibaba. We need for food sovereignty to exist for everybody. We also need a commons-based framework that Francine spoke about to govern environmental, genetic, weather, agronomic, and other publicly generated community data. After all, just because a corporation puts a camera doesn't mean that the practices of farming and the data about that belongs to the corporation, right? It's actually traditional knowledge. It's a knowledge that has been nurturing the land, nurturing societies. We also need collective legal protection against damages caused by unfair, discriminatory, and exploitative processing of data. My colleague on the panel spoke about workers in Africa, workers around the world. And today you actually have a kind of surveillance shop floor where workers are constantly monitored. And this is not just in a factory setting. It's the same. It's true for Uber drivers as well. And we need to redeem labor of this kind of predicament. We need participation of indigenous peoples and their visions of data and their visions of how data is inalienable somehow from their ways of being and becoming. And we need communities such as fisherfolk, farmers,
comunidades, pescadores, agricultores,
global to local digital policy processes. The second pillar is about decolonizing the digital paradigm. We need a pluralistic internet grounded in a constellation of translocal connections, open source innovation, and diverse knowledges to counter this kind of monolithic, Silicon Valley model of innovation. What's that? It is go there and break it or something like that, right? The narrative of, if you can, just break it. And that kind of idea of disruption, we don't want anything broken, right? It's so hard to rebuild, and that's something we are all witness to. We also need a fair digital economic order that creates the enabling conditions for digital industrialization of the global south. Today, data flows very freely, and this is exactly like, as I already mentioned, the idea that somehow we are all, placed equally, and if only data were to flow very fairly, fairness and justice will just accompany the free data flows. The hyperliberalization of data as the hegemonic narrative, which will define the economy of the future, right? And that we know is going to be completely unjust. And we need collective control for workers over their laboring data, so that workers can set up data cooperatives and decide how the value of data can be socialized. Decolonizing the digital paradigm also means that institutionalized norms and principles for evaluating and determining the limits of data extraction are vital. So we need to know what kind of data should not be extracted. I think it's enough that we have been sold so many things, personalized messages reaching us about what we can customize our lives with, right? You read a book and you're told what other books you should be reading. So I think there should be a limit to this kind of hyper-consumptive, subjectivity that the digital paradigm is creating. And we need transnational alliances of practitioners engaged in collaborative and cooperative platform models, not the kind of dominant platforms that we are witnessing in a kind of oligopolistic and monopolistic scheme. And of course, public funding for digital innovation. The third and final pillar is about how to restore people's control over digital technologies. And here, open, inclusive, and participatory policy-making processes from global to local levels are vital, which means we need independent, representative, multilateral mechanisms for governing the internet as a global public good, backed by an international treaty. Of course, people are very tired of treaties, but there's no way out. A global convention for data and cyberspace to dismantle the power of the big tech oligarchy and to promote peace, security, human rights, and global justice. This is exactly like the post-war context, right? When international institutions for financing for development were born, we had the human rights paradigm. And it looks like we have reached a point of no return where we need to dialogue globally to create these democratic institutions. And finally, we need regulation to rein in the runaway power of transnational digital corporations. We need AI policies that extend beyond the axes of accountability, non-discrimination, privacy, all of which are very, very important. But we also need to ensure that artificial intelligence or digital intelligence will be something that can be utilized by the smallest enterprises, the smallest businesses, women-owned enterprises, as also these bigger corporations. People have talked about a global digital taxation paradigm, and we do need to think about this, particularly in the post-COVID context, really on an urgent footing. And a framework for social media governance, the ways in which our democracy and public sphere have been gamed is really, I think, a sad truth of our times. And we need public interest objectives to define how regulatory frameworks, which safeguard our freedoms and yet do not cause unfreedoms for others, can be made to materialize. And sovereignty and public interest-based governance of digitalized infrastructures in food, health, finance, welfare, and other socioeconomic sectors. So this is the Digital New Deal. And recently, some of us have gotten together and we have crafted a letter in view of the fact that just as we are talking at the World Social Forum, the Davos dialogues are also in process. And the theme is the Great Reset. So we will not be able to reset if we go back to business as usual, and we need a great digital reset as if people and planet matter. I urge you all to add your signatures, the signatures endorsing, giving endorsements from your organizations, and my colleagues will post the link to this letter, open letter, critiquing the Davos paradigm on the chat window. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Anita, for this very, very interesting presentation. Once again, it's really a pleasure to listen to you and hear you explain these difficult things in a very, very understandable manner. Thank you very much. So again, I open the floor for questions. There was one question left, I think, from Bruno. I do not know which Bruno, in fact, but there was a Bruno asking for the floor in the former session. And if there are other questions, please put them in the chat box or in the question and answer section on your screen. Armando?
Sí, no, para primero agradecer las tres.
First, I'd like to thank the three speakers. Brilliant presentations. I think that the diversity and the diversity of elements we have to consider. I think it's very important that we should take note.
Sobre todo, yo creo que ahí
I think
entra
that the sense that the social forum is pursuing this idea of creating laboratory spaces. If we make an effort to translate this into a political impact in different countries.
Interrupter, porque hay un problema con la traducción.
There's a problem with the translation. English, French, that can't be heard.
Can you hear it now?
Speaking English, English channel I think is open.
I have a system that does not allow me to listen to the translation. So could you kindly just repeat what was said by, yes.
Armando will summarize it and then I will put it for you.
Yes, sorry about this.
Okay.
Kamal, tu entends?
Kamal, can you hear us? Yes, I can hear you, Francine.
Okay. ¿Puedo seguir? ¿Se puede escuchar la traducción?
Can I continue? Can you hear the translation?
Bueno, lo retomo.
I'll start again then. Given the complexity and the magnitude of the dimension of these issues on this panel, what we're proposing to do as a forum in alliance with other organizations is to have a space on a laboratory for public policies. There's one initiative already up there. We want to extend it. And Isabel, for example, mentioned the way of understanding the possibility of economic and financial sustainability. These are key things so that the social movements can express their arguments in favor of extending social protection. There needs to be agreements set up on the digital universe, obviously.
Digamos, registrar esa idea de crear estos laboratorios.
We need to register this idea of create laboratories, and then a laboratory for social conflict. Conflict in those fields is something ongoing. So we need to turn that into things that should be on a political agenda. There's tremendous potential. What's been said, but the thing now is to find ways of working together in alliances with greater capabilities. Thank you very much.
Armando is working on political laboratories, which are very important to share the knowledge with social movements who have to clearly understand what is happening in the world. And that is precisely what the three speakers have been explaining and have been making public, that sharing this knowledge. And these political laboratories which can help social movements to better understand all these problems should also be coupled to a knowledge of the conflictivity of the different social conflicts that are going on that can also be shared through these political laboratories. So I think this is the main message of Armando. Are there any questions, please? I see nothing in the question and answer. I have a question myself for Isabel. I mean, this overview of all the different financial possibilities that do exist in reality. Of course, they imply that the old, whatever you call it, neoliberal policies, structural adjustment, whatever, that these policies are abandoned. And there is some talk now during this crisis, for instance, in the European Union, where a couple of rules have been temporarily abandoned, but not definitely. Do you see any signs that there will be different policies that do allow for more public spending, also social expenditures in near future, that really can make these possibilities that you point to, that they really can become reality?
Thanks for the question and for all the comments that I've seen in the chat. Let me say, I think when it really will happen is when civil society becomes aware that there are funding options for all the policies that civil society wants. So far, it has been a technocratic decision taken behind closed doors by some technocrats at the Ministry of Finance and, with the advice of the IMF. And this is done behind the back of citizens who are there in the streets or not, thinking of different, options that might be needed. But, unless you identify the funding, it's not going to happen. Now, the neoliberal agenda that everybody's been talking here today, it has been about minimizing the state, making it very small. And a way of doing that was by strangling its budget, leaving it with very limited funding, privatizing assets and services. So really the state has very limited sources of revenue. And then when you have a very tiny state, they can do very, very little, isn't it? But there are positive points here. One, during the pandemic, states have realized that they can do many things. I think at the beginning they were kind of shocked, not really knowing how to tackle the thing, and then realized that actually many things can be done. And that's a positive state. Now, the key thing is keeping that state of mind and then not go back to suddenly, orthodox thinking and conservative thinking when the pandemic goes and then think, oh, no, well, now we are indebted, we need to cut all expenditures again, and so that will be bad. What we need to try to do is say, well, this was a positive lesson with all the, the silver lining of it. It was that no matter, of course, the pandemic has been very bad, but we realized that the states have capacity to do things. And things can be financed if we look, more, we look to the possible sources of fiscal space. Governments are doing that. The IMF even says they are doing that. But so far, there are Mickey Mouse discussions. What we need to do it is do it seriously. Think how, taxation can serve the, the development principles that we want. How, can we really fight illicit financial flows and the rest, no? So, and, in my experience, the best will be that there is a national public dialogue and that people really, civil society, trade unions, etc., could intervene in, with their voices as part of the, good governance and democratic societies to suggest and to support, those alternatives that might be more redistributive. Very clearly, people are not going to leave power naturally. They will need to be pressured. So that pressure, can work positively for democracies. And I think that is, indeed, it will be one of the ways forward.
Which means, if you allow me, which would mean that this social forum, for instance, could also play a role in exercising that pressure. And that at the national level, correct me if I'm wrong, and that at the national level, it means a better coordination and a better organization to exercise that pressure.
Indeed, I think that can be an avenue. Whatever it is, it must be kind of, an open articulated public debate, meaning with representative organizations that have been democratically elected. Because, you know, when you have national dialogues, sometimes they are captured by organizations that, you know, might be in the interest of a few powerful people to put, you know, some selected civil society organizations, you know, that might not be really representative, et cetera, et cetera. You do want to have really wide, you know, national debate with democratically elected organizations, you know, ideally federated, you know, so they really can respond and have a, you know, a voice that is meaningful and relevant.
Yeah, thank you very much. Raúl had a question.
Yes, thank you. Sí, tengo una pregunta. Voy a
Yes, I have a question. I'm going to do it in Spanish.
Es un poco con el
Even though
tema
I can speak English. It's a little bit about what Anita raised, the point Anita raised. What is the importance? What do you think is the importance of the LIDER software as movement?
Mucho interés en la preservación de los bienes.
It's very interested in preserving the social goods. So what's the alternative? And another point which is more general of the last point, I would like to know, what do you think about a more active role of public universities as agents of social transformative change? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anita, did you get the questions?
No, Francine, you have to repeat that.
Please.
I request you to repeat that if you can, because I don't have translation on my Zoom system.
But the questions are, what do you think about the importance of the free software movements that are now very, very popular amongst social movements, also here in the forum? And the second question was about the role of certain movements for promoting progress and for promoting a better way of working in the IT sector.
Yeah, I will take the second one first. I think that there have been a lot of positive movements from Silicon Valley employees in recent times. And one of the most, I think, pertinent news items that came up yesterday was Google employees are going to have a global union. And I think that there is no other way than for people from within to be able to see the system critically, right? And if that happens, then we have actually managed to somehow destabilize the status quo. So we see that the most disempowered and voiceless in the streets of many Indian cities, you know, the Uber drivers, the drivers of Ola, which is another company, they are taking out protests and they're dissenting and they are flagging attention to their condition. It's going to take a long time because there is a difference between the employees of Google and people who are not even recognized as employees of a company like Uber. There are many, many delivery workers, you know, there are gig workers who are employed who are in a, you know, we have something called Dunzo. You know, these are just messengers who run from one place to another delivering things. And it's really a precarization of the economy like never before. And so we will really need to be able to speak on behalf of workers on the spectrum who are really not visible at all. Although, of course, we really have to take strength from the fact that from the bigger tech companies, we are seeing unionization. The first question that Raúl asked is about the open source software movements. I think that the open source software movements were very relevant because at that point in time when the internet was an open network and it was possible to construct knowledge or co-construct knowledge in the form of code, the open source software movement seemed to provide a common-sified way to look at knowledge production. However, over time, what we see is that with the advent of data and AI technologies, most of the elite coders and software developers have been cannibalized by these big companies. So if you are a small tech firm, if you are like a startup and you have, very, very creative employees, or a bunch of 3-4 people, what we've seen over time is that much of this has been cannibalized by bigger companies who have co-opted these startups and folded them into their way of doing business. And this has been typically what we have seen. What we do need to do, therefore, is to recognize the real world politics, which complicates the older network and software layers with the new data and AI layers. And unless we actually are able to see the network data complex or the network data advantage that monopolistic companies are reaping, we will not be able to develop a comprehensive theoretical understanding of how to commensify and distribute the gains of the digital economy. Thank you.
One extra question. I'm very sorry, I forgot it in the first point. Do you see a role for public universities?
Of course, indeed. I think that it's vital that we are able to think about radically different ways by which to imagine knowledge, and this should be part of our classroom transactions. And what is really very emboldening is that the students' movements from across the world, from Hong Kong to Chile to Argentina and India, are able to join the dots. I really think that we should salute these movements because they have been able to see the connections between capture, extraction, and human rights. And they are able to articulate this from the point of view of social justice. So indeed, I think universities are vital. And I should say that from a country where the public university is a relic today.
I think. Felix?
Sí, muy rápidamente.
Yes, just very quickly to the panelists, but also all the participants. This idea of changing from the last century, from taking, the wealth from the rich to the poor, this idea of appropriation. Why don't we all make the effort to organize ourselves as consumer networks so that goods and services, we generate them ourselves at a better, cheaper price, and having power over economic sectors? The slab of consumption is a part of this forgotten struggle. If we make this effort within as consumers and as producers and consumers, that's a strategic piece. I don't know what you think about that. Thank you. It's for the panelists, for everybody.
That could also be answered by Mr. Ayuba Wabba if you got a question about networks that consumers and all of us could try to develop in order to counter the market-oriented activities. Not know, Isabel, if you want to answer, or if Anita, Ayuba Wabba, if anyone is there to answer the question.
Yes, I think it's an interesting proposal, and we are not going to achieve victories by one strategy only. So this, we'll have to look to many avenues on how to advance issues, and that will be one. So we'll have an avenue that it will be, to have more responsible consumer behaviors. It is not new. I mean, it has existed for many decades, and so far it has not expanded so much. But, it should be pursued. And I think with this one, other avenues also need to be pursued. It's not, this is a very strong fight we are having to change, the neoliberal order. So it's not going to happen only with one strategy. It will happen with many. And so we need to pursue them all and ensure that we attack from many fronts, not just with one strategy.
Thank you. Anita, anything more?
Just the point that I think the ideas of workers and consumers coming together and having cooperatives is not a new idea. It's actually a very old idea. And we have experts here who know much more about this than me. But I would like to say that the contemporary context of platforms allows us to imagine the ways by which responsible consumption and accountable production, as well as labor power, can come together in alternative forms of organizing where consumers and workers can come together and forge platform cooperatives. Of course, there is a lot of literature out there, and I'm happy to share more information, but this is an idea I think that is one of the possibilities of the future.
Thank you. Armando?
No, only to add something. I think the question about the public universities is very challenging. I mean, when we talk about public universities, we could imagine that the public universities are aligned with the idea of public interest automatically. But in fact, the state-owned universities or state-financed universities are in the middle of a struggle, ideological struggle as well. So I think one problem we have is that we need to go beyond the limits of certain careers or centers that are providing critical views from the university, and to think about the university, the public universities, as a space for political struggle. I mean, we need to change the way public universities are linked with the nation's interests or the people's interests, and so that's something that I think we need to move around our agendas, because otherwise we will have a lot of difficulties. It's not sufficient to have human sciences specialists to deal with that. We need to move people from the hard areas, as we are talking here about the data science. And so in this sense, I would like to emphasize the need to go through this struggle in the university space as well, because it's the knowledge space finally, and where we are educating leaders for society. So it's a problem that we need to face. And about the question of the consumption, I think that's a very substantial question, the way we consume and we produce and consume. And of course, it gains a lot of importance in the environmental questions and the organization of the economy, but as well, it's very important in the social policy and social services. I mean, the way we produce and consume social services is something that we need to understand, from the social needs to the broader perspective of the way we deal with the organization of social policy and the work in social policy. So I think that's important to take this in consideration, as Felix mentioned, but in a wider perspective, production and consumption, even in the social policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if there are no more questions, I think, looking at the clock, we should go to our third panel. I have not seen Aminata DramanaTraoré on the list. I'm not sure she's here. I have the impression she is not. At any rate, I think we can start with, I will contact her. I think we can start with Raúl Delgado. Sorry? I think we can start with Raúl Delgado, who is UNESCO professor on migration, development and human rights, and works for the Autonomous University of Zacatecas in Mexico and the International Network on Migration and Development. Raúl, you have the floor.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Francine. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to try to stick within my 10 minutes. I want to share my screen. Can you please make me co-host so I can share my screen, please? And I want to share my PowerPoint with everybody. Thank you. Okay, now you can see my screen. Great. What I would like to share with you is a vision, a contra-hegemonic vision against for migration, against contemporary capitalism and neoliberalism, with an approach from a point of view of development. So my presentation, it will be divided into four parts. The first part, I would like to speak quickly about the nature of migration, contemporary migration, how it affects capitalism and contemporary imperialism. And also I'd like to speak about, I would like to demystify these indicators of migration and give an alternative vision against the dominating trend to criminalize migrants. Then I'm going to talk about a central theme that I've worked about the genesis of a new international division of work, which I'm talking about exporting a workforce, and ends with reapproaching the question of migration and development. And in the 21st century, and also in times pre-COVID. So we are before a battlefield in theory, where the position is centered on a doctrine of national security, on criminalization of migration, with public policies that are molded by huge organizations, or the mantra of remittance, which is represented from the north to the south. And that's the World Bank as well has also constructed these forums. And so from this position, there's been an idea, a social idea of the migrant as a type of public enemy. And this has been cultivated by the ultra-right and the neo-fascists. So from this, we have this point of view in international forums, especially in the World Social Forum for Migration. We have been trying to have a counter position to this from a point of view of human security from the South, which doesn't negate the position of the North in dialectic terms, but we are trying to have an integrative, inclusive, emancipatory and libertarian perspective, which is based on a Latin American critical thought. So we need to understand the causes of this problem from the bottom. We need to understand the root causes, the structural causes, the new division of work internationally, new mechanisms of unequal exchange, and the strengthening, the deepening of this inequality. Today, we have 280 million international migrants, 750 million internal migrants, and this means that migration has become a strategic topic on the international agenda. So to be able to basically get underneath these, to understand it, we have to look at the absolute general law of accumulation, which means on the one hand, we have the concentration and centralization of capital, which has meant that there is an omnipresence of the capital, the monopoly of capital. from the reserves, from the movement of reserve, and there is an overpopulation which exacerbates the situation. So the development is out of control by productive efforts. So we must understand, how does this manifest? How does this law manifest on an international level? How does it operate in a different way in the North Hemisphere, in the Southern Hemisphere, and in on the central and the periphery? And what is its special stamp that it has on our contemporary capitalism? I'm going to talk a bit, some keys of contemporary capitalism. And there's a term that I like to talk about, which is shows very clearly, which is called the era of generalized monopolies. It's not just an excessive concentration of capital, but there's also a global network of monopoly of capital. Is a very important element is financialization. The monopoly of financialization is extractive, but is not only the metamorphosis of monopolist capital. What, as many know, that this is the global value chains, which we have been innovation systems, and the imperial innovation system of Silicon Valley. And when we talk about the 2.2 billion global workers today, we have 67% of workers who are part of the actual reserve. But in this reserve army, they are distributed unequally throughout the planet, throughout the north-south divide. So 20% of the reserve army is found in countries, high-income countries, but 80% are from the low-income countries. And this generates a strong pressure on people to immigrate in the direction from south to north. And this is associated with the emergence of a new international division of work, which I call the exploitation of a workforce, direct or indirect, with the growth that it's directly and indirectly related to those periphery countries. There is around 100 million workers today who work in assembly lines in the periphery countries of the world. And this is what I call an indirect exploitation of the workforce. All of this is giving rise to new and exacerbated ways of exchange. This means that there is a compulsive displacement, which is expanded from the traditional nation to a forced migration. So this is the idea of forced migration.
Immigration.
It is a regressive spiral which is catapulted by deprivation of means of production, of subsistence, displacement, violence, natural catastrophes, which means that the survival of great segments of the population, especially in the south, must migrate. So it's a a forced and a huge displacement, which is subject to structural and legal restrictions such as criminalization, and means that the migrant it means that they are extremely vulnerable and in precarious, and they are open to extreme exploitation, even death.
So we have new migration for violence, catastrophes, conflict, for people trafficking, 40 million, migration through dispossession, exclusion, extreme poverty, and unemployment. And we have at least 120 million economic migrants. I put it in inverted commas because there's not for a freely and decided. There's just a pure need to emigrate. We also have migration because people are overqualified, don't have enough opportunities. That's 30 million people. Not a lot of work has been done on them. Then return migration is it's another type of forced migration through major here. What I want to highlight here is how migration grows exponentially, especially in the neoliberal period, especially with structural adjustment programs in Mexico, and still strengthened even more by the Treaty of Free Trade. I'll go quickly now, for the lack of time, just to highlight the need to demystify the dominant decision, the prevailing decisions. This is a systematic survey that we've done in the international network to try and give an alternative vision. Here's some data of the USA, which allows us to see how, for 2000 to 2015, in USA, the jobs, 45.2% have been taken by immigrants. And if we go, we'll look at by descendants of immigrants too. Very strong influence of immigration of host countries, receiving countries, and there's the GDP of the USA, and that's reflected in terms of the contribution to growth of GDP, internal GDP in the last 15 years is due to the 40.8% contribution of migrant laborers. So, and with this graph, refer to something that become one of the most dynamic elements of migration. Is also in comparison with the USA. In 1990, just over 1 million immigrants with postgraduate qualifications, and now it's over 6 million at present. So this has to do with what I call the imperial innovation system. It's a machine to generate patents, which there's a lot of tension in the world of patents, the large corporations. I can't go into too much detail on this for reasons of time, but the new ways of appropriation of knowledge, which should be a common asset or a general intellect, as Karl Marx called it. The rate of patents by foreigners in the USA was from 18% in 1963 to 53% in 2019. More than half the innovations come from foreigners. This is very major change has to do with the restructure of innovation systems in these, the predominance of knowledge-intensive activity. But 91% of all the patents were granted, appropriated rather than granted, by multinational corporations. As you can see at the bottom, USA still has a major control and domination in terms of innovative companies. So this is my last slide. What I'd like to underline is that export of labor, both direct through migration or indirect through assembly plants in other countries, is a key exporters of labor, in a sense that because they operate with the imported labor and goods, and they don't pay taxes as a result. So it's this migration takes place at a very high rate, especially in highly skilled professions. So this covers the whole range of fields, both jobs with low qualifications and those with high qualifications, the highly skilled workers. So it makes a change in the international divisions of labor that leads to new forms of exchange and focus particularly on assembly plants. The transfer of all the profits abroad. Well, they go back to the country where the company has its main offices, obviously. So we're at a crossroads now in terms of civilization. It's a crisis. They call it an epoch crisis, or a crisis of civilization. So we really need to transcend neoliberalism and capitalism. The theme of the social forum, another word is possible, is necessary. And it's urgent, not just possible, it's necessary and urgent. This means the need to try and find new ways of proactive and emancipatory forms of resistance. So I'll finish by saying that the support for a global network of sanctuary cities that exert solidarity and are sustainable, coming out of the forum next year in Mexico, it goes in this direction, and it points the way forward in terms of construct something different from bottom up and from the left, obviously. Thank you very much.
Kamal?
Merci, Francine. Je viens d'écouter, merci à Raúl Delgado. Sur la question, hier encore, on écoutait un petit peu les témoignages de migrants subsahariens au Maroc, en Algérie, en Tunisie, et particulièrement en Libye. Des témoignages poignants qui nous jettent directement dans l'enfer du vécu des migrants dans la région. Sans compter toutes les personnes qui sont mortes en Méditerranée ou dans le désert. Et nous continuons notre descente en enfer tout à l'heure avec Dalia, qui va un petit peu. C'est dommage. Aminata ne soit pas avec nous pour nous donner un éclairage sur l'Afrique et le néo-libéralisme, mais nous allons écouter tout à l'heure Dalia sur le rôle des femmes et de la jeunesse dans le processus des politiques sociales transformatrices. Il rappeler que, contrairement à ce que j'ai entendu, ce qui se passe dans la région n'est pas une émeute. Il s'agit de véritables révolutions qui ont été déclenchées depuis décembre 2010 en Tunisie. Ce mouvement de fond qui a mis davantage sur la question de la centralité politique de la protection et de la justice sociale a embrasé le monde en passant de la Tunisie vers l'Égypte, en allant à Hong Kong, en passant par le Liban, aujourd'hui par le Yémen, par le Soudan, autant de mouvements qui réclament justement la justice sociale. Il est clair aujourd'hui, d'après ce que j'ai entendu, que la justice sociale s'est avérée indissociable de la crise politique et économique. Parce qu'au fond, le choix économique et les choix qui ont été adoptés par les États sous l'impulsion de cette financialisation de l'économie, de la privatisation des services publics, a fait que, particulièrement sur la santé et l'enseignement, et on le voit encore aujourd'hui avec la crise qui s'est approfondie, il est clair aujourd'hui que les États ne sont même plus capables de pouvoir garantir cette protection sociale à leurs citoyens et citoyennes. Je crois que Dalia va nous mettre davantage un éclairage de la région et sujette non seulement à une présence forte militaire, mais aussi à des conflits intercommunautaires et un mouvement de fond social qui continue à aujourd'hui à manifester son désir de justice, d'égalité et de dignité. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes à quelque chose de plus de 870 personnes arrêtées en Tunisie. Ils attendent avec impatience votre soutien. On est aussi le Hirak, ce qu'on appelle le mouvement social de protestation en Algérie. On sait que tout ce monde, en passant par le Rif au Maroc, en passant par la Tunisie, l'Algérie et ce qui se passe en Libye, aujourd'hui finissent en prison. Ils ont besoin de solidarité directe, active. Parce que, comme vous le dites, la criminalisation des mouvements sociaux a pris une ampleur qui touche aussi tout ce qui est relatif à l'expression à travers les nouveaux médias. Dalia, marhaban, bienvenue. Marhaban, Palestine. À vous la parole.
Thank you. Allow me to begin by thanking the organizers and the first. I will be speaking about the case of political funding in Palestine, as it's a way of blackmailing the Palestinian people in receiving humanitarian support, considering that the subject is related to political, economical, and even the social discourse in the world. I will also try to shed the light on how governmental humanitarian funds are used as a political tool where people are asked to trade their dignity for their economic and social rights, especially in times where people are most in need, like the midst of a global pandemic, especially that these conditions threaten also the existence of bodies who are the main actors in calling for social protection in Palestine. Our world is progressing daily towards what some call democracy and development, yet the daily practices of governments and multinational corporations towards social movements, individuals, and marginalized groups is towards violence, oppression, and inequality, proving that we are heading towards the closing of spaces and control of and government's dominance, even over definitions such as poverty, human rights, terrorism, and other concepts. In light of this reality, the challenges facing civil society represented by activists, social movements, parties, unions, institutions, NGOs, and other bodies is increasing. And the biggest challenge of them all is resisting and reclaiming spaces in order to implement justice. The platform provided by the World Social Forum today is extremely important for sharing visions and discussing issues of economic, social, and political dimensions on an international level. And hopefully it will enable us to build a collective solidarity and action. Since 1948 until today, the Palestinians have faced colonialism that employs all possible means to eliminate Palestinian society, whether by the use of violence, confiscating lands, resources, etc. It also works on the principle of dismantling the Palestinian society by dividing the people and imposing geographical divisions through checkpoints and apartheid wall and other means. The Zionist occupation is working internationally towards criminalizing the Palestinian struggle through different means, such as threatening international activists who support the Palestinians or banning them from reaching or visiting Palestine, using propaganda to demonize the Palestinian people, and especially political parties, through stigmatizing them as terrorists, in addition to legalizing their arrests, torture through illegal Israeli military courts. Among the many human rights issues that should be raised today, my paper will focus on the decision of political conditional funding for the Palestinian organizations, considering it's a tool that is used to blackmail the Palestinians in the name of humanitarian fund, especially that this position comes in the light of a bigger political context of deal of the century and the normalization of some Arab countries with the Israeli occupation. The course of funding in Palestine differed distinctly from before and after Oslo Accords. It was considered mainly before Oslo Accords as solidarity funding directed by the people to the people, by movements and international parties unconditionally to support the struggle and strengthen the economic and social steadfastness of the Palestinians. The signing of Oslo Accords and the influx of political funds based mainly on the vision of peace building changed the institutional environment for the Palestinian development process, thereby harming the national agenda. Since the international donors started determining in advance the priorities through a call of proposals rather than allowing people to choose what they consider a priority on the economic and social levels, especially in the context of national liberation. In one way or another, we can consider the conditions for funding began with the institutionalization of international human rights organizations and the interventions of the World Bank. And in the Palestinian context, it became more clear with the beginning of promoting the discourse of peace. An unjust peace, because it is imposed by the virtue of the balance of powers and not with regards to rights. Later on, first conditions of a clear political nature were imposed on the people by the United States Agency for Development, the USAID, in 2002, whereby the agency required institutions to sign a document renouncing terrorism that includes the names of Palestinian political parties, and required institutions to sign it in an exchange for assistance and grants. Then it's stipulated in the names of employees and workers in the institutions, their partners, the beneficiaries, they all must be checked. And it has reached to the point where holding the recipient of the grant legal and civil liability, and thus holding him accountable under American law. As for the European Union, a list was made in 2001, restrictions imposed on countries as an internal document, but the sanctions were not imposed on the Palestinians, especially on Palestinian NGOs, as a condition for receiving funding and grants. However, without prior warning, the European Union announced in July 2019 its decision to impose political conditions on funding, represented by demanding Palestinian institutions who want to benefit from any grants to sign a list that states the name of 5 Palestinian...
Sorry, can I interrupt you? Could you speak a bit slower, please, for the interpreters? A bit slower for the interpreters. Thank you so much.
Sure. So it demanded the Palestinian institutions who want to benefit from any grants to sign a list that states the name of 5 Palestinian political parties as terrorists. It should be also noted that since the European Union announced its intention to add these conditions, many countries have individually applied the same conditions, which we consider as political blackmail. Why do we as Palestinians renounce these conditions? Because the conditions imposed by the European Union contradict to the international laws and Palestinian Association law, as it breaches the United Nations General Assembly law and decision, resolution number 2105 of December 20, 1965, which stipulates the right of colonized people to struggle for their right to self-determination by all means. In addition, the condition contradicts the Palestinian Association's law, which clearly states the conditional funding is not accepted politically, but it affirms in its power to prevent institutions from directing their funds outside the scope of their projects. For its part, Palestinian institutions negotiated with the EU and presented an acceptable proposal that includes the institution's commitment not to transfer funds to any political party without stigmatizing any Palestinian party as terrorist. The institution's commitment to distributing grants money according to approved project proposals. The institution's commitment to respect international human rights in their work and when providing services. The European Union rejected this proposal in the negotiations, which confirms that the conditions is not technical, but rather includes a clear political objective. According to these conditions, it is required to transform the concept of civil society from demanding of freedoms to participate in policing and monitoring the Palestinian people. The role of civil society internationally and since its establishment has been to demand freedoms and the demand of just rights and policies. However, the conditions imposed on funding and the procedures that will follow will make Palestinian civil society institutions a watchdog over its people and the rest of the components of civil society, including political parties, unions, and others. It also places institutions in a place where international and local law violations, which institutions have always been funded to comply with these laws and educate individuals about the importance of international law and human rights organizations. Yet the same donors are asking us to breach these laws and disrespect the dignity of our people. The conditions also create a gap between the Palestinian people who are part or support these political parties and the institutions, in addition to preventing the institutions from benefiting the right holders of the project to benefit from it. In addition, the Palestinian organizations are also subjected to the attacks of the occupation, whether from the propaganda that is directed against them internationally or the confiscation of their belongings, the raiding of their offices, and the arrest of those working within them. And therefore, employees and workers in these institutions are exposed to the terror and subjected to the brutality of the occupation, whether as individuals or employees. Therefore, as Palestinian employees in Palestinian institutions, they have the right of self-determination and the democratic right to choose which political party represents them, and they cannot be asked to relinquish their rights. Colonized people are exposed to all unhumane economic, social, and political violations. And and their priority in their daily life is to have the right, especially the right of the national struggle. And so we cannot expect the people to allow the organizations to sign such grants. Terrorism also as a concept has become today a tool in the hands of the authorities set in a way that suits states and multinational companies. And this is done precisely through the use of laws and registrations. For example, terrorism is used in cases such as Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo prison by states and private companies. And in other cases, laws and legislations and concepts of state security have been used to suppress fair demonstrations or activists. Nothing has changed for the Palestinians and their methods of struggle in the past from today, except the unconditional support that welcomed their struggle in the past has changed into the stigma of terrorism recently due to the imbalance of power and interests. Nothing has changed regarding the Palestinian claim to their rights from the past until today, but the only variables have occurred are in the balance of power between states. Therefore, false accusations of terrorism that are used by the Zionist occupation and accepted in international measures as a given fact have reflected on the human rights and on the social and economic status of the people. What is required from the international community and activists today? I think we need to set the right measures, and we need to pressure. Yeah.
2 minutes.
No, I think it's okay to discuss this in the question part. It's fine.
Dalia?
Yeah, we can discuss this in the discussion part or the questions part. Yeah.
Parfait. On ouvre les questions. À vous la parole. À vous la parole. Armando.
Non. Je n'ai pas pris la parole. Je n'ai pas demandé la parole, excusez-moi. Je crois que de toute façon, il y a des questions qui sont très importantes, qui ont été présentées par Raúl et par Lamia, qui sont vraiment des questions qui parlent du point de vue de la justice sociale et des droits sociaux, et d'une perspective qui va au-delà des aspects de chacun des pays et qui demande une citoyenneté globale. Je crois que c'est toujours la question qui est derrière l'idée que les migrants, les immigrés, puissent avoir la possibilité de préserver, d'avoir protégé ses droits n'importe où les personnes sont dans la dimension globale. Et dans le cas particulier de la situation en Palestine, je crois qu'il y a toujours une sorte d'exceptionnalité qui est appliquée pour justement limiter les possibilités d'exercice des droits pour le peuple en Palestine. Et je crois que ça, c'est une question importante, comme a été présentée, pour penser que les questions qui sont présentées comme obligatoires, des questions de droits en Palestine, sont aussi appliquées dans d'autres des villes, villages sanctuaires. C'est aussi une manière de faire en sorte d'exercice, de matérialiser des exemples qui puissent inspirer des garanties, des systèmes plus complets de protection sociale. Je crois que ce sont des éléments très importants pour penser l'avenir de notre débat autour de la justice sociale comme expression des systèmes économiques et sociaux basés dans les droits et basés dans la souveraineté des peuples aussi. Merci.
Merci Armando. D'autres questions?
Yes, I have a question. I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question. Well, the most obvious question, I think, for Raúl, and I guess you must have answered it many times already. With the first measures of the new U.S. president, which are positive, I mean, for the migrant population in the U.S., do you think there will be in the bit longer term a real improvement for migrant people from Mexico and Latin America to the U.S.? Can the situation really improve, or do you think it will be the same as in the past?
¿Contesto o esperamos?
Allez-y, si vous voulez, par la même occasion, donner un petit éclairage sur le pacte, le nouveau pacte européen sur la migration.
Sí, con mucho gusto. Bueno, de lo que acaba de plantear
From what Francine just asked, the new government of Mexico has a tremendous debt in relation to the migration issue. Trump made Mexico adopt the role of frontier guard. When López Obrador took over in Mexico, he talked of something that's important: attack the root causes and help it contribute to development and integration. Isabel has proposed that. It wasn't put forward with any great conviction. It didn't go anywhere. It wasn't successful. In the European case, I've met periodically with left-wing European politicians to see how we can approach the problem of the increase of xenophobia and racism, and how this has contributed to the progress of the ultra-right, the far right, and the fascists. What we considered is the need to get together and prepare a strategy, an in-depth strategy for the development of Africa. We were in Senegal and other countries too. There are policies there that don't contribute at all to the development of the region. This is an outstanding debt. The great commitment we have is to the social movements. As Armando said, we can weave networks, support networks, and of social transformation to are much more proactive. We told them that these sanctuary spaces or cities that are done through civil society networks, not through the government. That's, I think, we would need to work on in that approach. We could also call them rebellious cities, who don't like this aggressive policy against migrants, and try and help this to change on a world level so we can transform capitalism, and above all, we can make progress by attacking the root causes. that foster unequal development. And then there's a monopoly capital, this new imperialism that's associated with that, the power of big capital. With new social movements, new alliances, strategic alliances. I think this is something that the World Social Forum has got to work on too. Francine expressed it very well, the restructuring of the WSF, and a lot of hope placed in the next forum in Mexico.
Merci Raúl. Dalia, tu souhaites ajouter quelque chose?
No, I just hope we can find a way to connect and speak more of how all the subjects that were.
D'autres questions? Des propositions qui pourraient structurer notre mouvement? Francine?
Francine, have you anything else to say? Any more proposals?
If there are no more questions or remarks, I think we can
Francine,
thank the, yes, please.
¿me escuchan?
Sí,
Can you hear me?
Por ahí puse una
It's lovely to be here. I just wrote a little note about a Mexican experience that was presented by my colleague Raúl. And there was a question, a historical and structural question on migration in Mexico, which has become in the 1940s, when the US was in war, there was a program that was called Bracero, like the arm. And so Mexicans would go to work, needed to go to work in the US. And it ended up becoming a tradition. I think there's 20 million Mexicans in the US. So they are the second economic force in the country. And if they didn't have this economic force, there wouldn't be a survival in the US. The US wouldn't be able to survive. So in Oaxaca as well, 80% of the population of Oaxaca lives on the informal economy, and many indigenous communities, Zapotec, speak in the Zapoc, their own language, and in English. They don't know how to speak Spanish because they have a connection with the US. It's really interesting. So there need to be some structural readings of how a progressive government policy doesn't give the necessary answers. It's a structural problem. And this economic structure, for example, 60% of the national of our national territory is given to mines, to mining companies. So there's an awful, it's a terrible, they have been taking away our natural resources. It hurts. In Zacatecas, there is the mine, and they are exploited. So we have to think, how can we connect to fight against this social and economic injustice, this system of social and economic injustice that is taking our resources.
Sí, hablo en español. No solo para
I'll speak in Spanish.
Mensaje que final.
It's just a final message I would like to say. I would like to use my current position as a member, a special mechanism working on the UN Council, because I have the responsibility of leading a study which will be presented in the second half of 2022 on development, inequality, and social development, global social development. And I think that from the start, the commitment of this investigation was to mobilize a very wide dialogue with social movements on this topic. I think that also this space here we have achieved to establish links, connections, which we can develop with other organizations to participate with this study, which is a process that we need to structure as best we can, the most powerful way we can within this debate. And I would just like to leave the idea that with the Migration Forum and the Pan-Amazomic Amazon Forum on the level, international, national level, we've highlighted we wish to strengthen this space, to support this space with political policies and advocacy.
Eso sería una manera de
profundizar los debates que estamos should be a way of deepening our debates and getting to the bottom of them and how we can carry out these agendas in the regions and to participate in this new social world forum. We will be able to discuss all of these topics in greater discussion, in greater depth, democracy and environmental justice, social justice, to have a material debate on social processes. And faced with the pandemic, it's clear that how we are lacking in the structures, in public service structures in our countries, especially in the global south, but also in the north, which have been under political restrictions. And in these critical situations, such as Palestine and other fractured states in war under imperial conditions or unilateral sanctions, I think that there is a ground to think of where social movements should look at sovereign development and political development. So this is also a challenging debate for us to have, that we should consider our role and societies of creating a new framework and counter-narrative to the dominance and other perspectives. So I think this should give us a lot of enthusiasm to keep going, and I want to thank Francine and everyone who's participated today. Thank you.
Merci, Armando. Avant de donner la
Thank
parole.
you, Armando. Just going to give the word to, I'm just going to let Francine have the floor to finish.
Nous souhaitons, au niveau du Maghreb, organiser le prochain forum social mondial sur la nutrition. Donc, on va vous écrire et voir si c'est réalisable. Comme vous le savez, on avait prévu le tribunal permanent des peuples en Tunisie. Je crois que, en espérant que les conditions vont changer, l'Occident continue à prendre les 80% des vaccins et qu'il nous vont de la planète et des pays en développement à 120%. Donc, mais nous espérons pouvoir, vers le mois de septembre, pouvoir tenir le permanent des peuples sur la région maghrébine, sur la question.
Thank you very much. I thank we've come at the end of our agenda exactly on time, which is really amazing. I do not know what has happened to Aminata. She has been with us this week already, but apparently today she left no message. I do not know what happened. Anyway, I would like to thank all the speakers very, very, very much. This was really a very interesting session. I think we have learned a lot. We have recorded everything, so this will be made available to all. And we will make a report. And I do hope we count on you in the future for all these matters concerning social justice, because obviously this is a long-term project. And with the World Social Forum for Health and Social Security, I think we have an excellent tool to work on these topics. We have now heard something on migration, which is directly linked to social justice, but there are other topics that we will have to tackle, that we will have to examine. We are working on social justice as well in the Asia region with the Asia-Europe People's Forum. So we have a lot of tools in our hands with an enormous potential. We can work on these. We can develop all these points. And for this, it is so very important that we can count on your contributions and on your help, because that is the only way to do it. And as I think it was Isabel speaking about the pressure to exercise other governments, other international organizations, we have to work with our grassroots so that all these different levels can be articulated, that we can indeed, hopefully, make some progress in the direction of social justice. And that should be more. I have to stress it once again. It has to be more than what the World Bank wants us to do. So we have to work at comprehensive programs that look further than the poverty agenda and then the health agenda. This is really, as we started, this is really a point of change, and that is what we have to look at. So I thank you all very, very much. I thank the interpreters once again. Without their help, it would not have been possible. And I do hope we see you again very soon in one of our other meetings. Thank you so very much.
Merci à vous.
Gracias.
Gracias, Rosy.
you.